All right. If you have not yet completed that poll popping up on your screen, please go ahead and submit it. We'd love to hear your responses. We're going to get started here. Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Disaster Preparedness, Why Funding Before a Disaster is Crucial. Today, we will explore critical strategies and real-world examples to enhance resilience to hazards and emergencies. My name is Sarah Lakritz, and I'm the Vice President for Brand and Storytelling here at CDP. I use she, her pronouns. And you'll see that instead of my headshot, I've actually shown a picture of my family. We often say that disasters are personal and that they affect our communities and the people we love. When we think about disaster preparedness, I actually like to think of it as an act of love because we're taking steps to ensure that when the next disaster strikes, that we are all better positioned to withstand and recover. This is a photo of my family. And when I think about the importance of disaster preparedness, I think about families all around the world and what we can all be doing to better support each other. So as we get rolling, a few housekeeping items. Live captioning is available now via Zoom. Click on closed caption, live transcript to access it. And these are available in multiple languages. We are recording this webinar. It will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel shortly after we've finished. At the end of the webinar, there will also be a short survey. We ask that you please take a moment to complete this. It will help us improve our webinar offerings and ensure that we're meeting your needs as best as possible. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the panel presentation. This webinar is co-sponsored by Giving Compass, National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, and Philanthropy New York. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors. Your support is very important and helpful. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges it works on the stolen lands of many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural impacts of colonialism and disasters. The erasure of Indigenous knowledge and about how to care for these lands has caused environmental destruction and degradation. CDP is committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy and their connections to philanthropy today and in the future. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us in acknowledging the original peoples and their elders and past, present, and future generations. So today, at the end of the webinar, our hope is that you will walk away with and understand the importance of disaster risk reduction and preparedness, anticipatory action and climate change adaptation, learn techniques for engaging with and supporting local communities, especially marginalized and vulnerable populations, to ensure equitable recovery and resilience, and be equipped with actionable and effective funding strategies to support communities before, during, and after a disaster. All right, so you'll recall we asked you to take that poll at the opening of the webinar. Let's take a look at what we see. We're looking at the disaster preparedness. Have you or your organization ever funded or worked on preparedness efforts? We're seeing an abundance of you responded yes. About 85% said yes to that. So that's fantastic. And thank you so much for your support of preparation efforts. We know that they are critical, and we'll talk more about that today. And how familiar are you with the unique challenges of funding and executing preparedness strategies? Sort of a more wide range there. We're sort of across the board. So we have a pretty even split between familiar and somewhat familiar. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, we'll get a little bit more of a shift toward the very familiar, or at least somewhat familiar, as we continue to work toward how and why we can better support disaster preparedness and what those strategies could look like. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and input on those questions. It's really interesting to see, and we'll see how we can sort of move those learning goals forward throughout the discussion today. I want to share a few data points before we introduce our speakers today and to ground our discussion. The Climate Resiliency Report released in the fall of 2024 by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Allstate, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation found that within the United States, every dollar invested in preparedness can save communities $13. This includes $6 in savings for damage and cleanup costs and $7 in saved economic costs for the community, including job losses, reduced incomes, and other economic impacts. These numbers can vary depending on the type of mitigation, the type of disaster, and the geographic location. I am sure that our speaker today, Kate Knack from Allstate, will tell us more about this report when we get to the panel. A report from the Global Center on Adaptation in 2019 found that investing $1.8 trillion globally in 5 areas from 2020 to 2030 could generate $7.1 trillion in total net benefits. The 5 areas of climate adaptation the report considers are early warning systems, climate resilient infrastructure, improved dryland agriculture, mangrove protection, and investments in making water resources more resilient. These represent just a portion of the total investments needed and total benefits available. And despite data showing the effectiveness of preparedness and resilience in reducing the overall costs of disasters, we know that a small proportion of philanthropy's disaster giving supports preparedness. CDP's Measuring the State of Disaster Philanthropy 2024 report found that while 66.1% of institutional philanthropic disaster giving in 2022 went toward response and relief, just 3.4% supported preparedness. All right, so now the good stuff, right? Now it's my honor to introduce our special guests. I'm looking forward to the information that they will share with us. Patty Hernandez is the co-founder and executive director of Headwaters Economics. She has 18 years of experience in economic development research, community assistance, technology solutions, and nonprofit leadership. She has led Headwaters Economics development of highly regarded interactive tools such as neighborhoods at risk and wildfire risk to communities that help communities adapt to climate change. Welcome, Patty. Kate Knack is the Vice President, Allstate Foundation and Social Impact, where she is overseeing the foundation's signature social impact programs, including efforts focused on empowering youth to serve, disrupting the cycle of relationship abuse, and increasing access to thriving wage careers, as well as nonprofit leadership development, disaster relief, and Allstate agent and employee volunteerism. She also oversees Allstate's corporate philanthropic work. Welcome, Kate. Great to have you. Sean Bissar began working with the Home Depot Foundation in 2016 and is currently the manager of national programs and strategic partnerships, where he oversees THDF's critical home repair and disaster response and long-term recovery programs. Prior to his time at the Home Depot Foundation, Sean lived in New Orleans, where he assisted with long-term recovery efforts post-Hurricane Katrina and with rebuilding together New Orleans and the Green Project. Welcome, Sean. Great to have you. It's great to have all of our panelists, and thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon to speak with us and share your expertise and knowledge on preparedness. All right, Patty, to kick us off, I'm wondering what you can share about what we know about who is at risk of experiencing disasters here in the US, and what, if anything, are we doing to reduce this risk?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's a great starter question. And I just want to thank CDP really quickly for the opportunity. I'm super excited to share ideas with you all today, and thanks everybody for joining. All right, so certainly most people know that they have some exposure to disasters, but I think the increase in disasters that we've seen in the last decade have taken a lot of us by surprise. That's true from hurricanes to extreme heat to wildfires. And I've been thinking a lot about wildfires, as many of us have with the recent fires in LA. And if you just look across the past 50 years, it's evident that 75% of the damages that we've experienced have been concentrated just in the last decade. And since about in that same time frame, we've lost about 100,000 homes to wildfires. But we actually do have a pretty good grasp on what it's going to take to prepare. And it's exciting to think about the models that have proven to be successful. So most of us take for granted that we go to work and our kids go to school in buildings that meet seismic standards, that our neighborhoods have fire hydrants, that our homes have fire alarms. And we know that these solutions have saved millions of lives. And so we have an opportunity now to take similar steps and actions to build homes and communities that can withstand today's threats. Returning to wildfires, I think they're particularly interesting because historically, most of us have thought about the threat being more related to, a cabin or a vacation home in the woods. But really, if you look at what we know about wildfire risk, 1 in 3 Americans, more than 100 million people, live in high wildfire, severity zones. And in states that you might not really expect, states like Florida and Oklahoma and Texas. So we dropped into the chat a study that Headwaters Economics recently did, just articulating the magnitude of that problem and also the well-researched actions that communities can take to pursue risk reduction projects. And what's emerging is that the use of better materials for things like roofing and decks and landscaping are proving to be incredibly effective at reducing wildfire risk.
Mm.
So it's really a matter of implementing these solutions up front and at scale to protect people and save communities and also taxpayers, billions of dollars in avoided costs.
It's really alarming to hear the numbers that you're citing here of the number of homes at risk of wildfire. But I do appreciate the note of hope that you've added, that there are things that we can do to better prepare for and also mitigate the harms of that wildfire. Kate, from Allstate Foundation's perspective, how does preparedness funding tie into long-term recovery efforts?
Yeah, thank you for the question, for having me today. Just appreciate this such important conversation that we really feel grateful to be part of. So Allstate in general obviously has a long history of protecting communities. Again, you heard about our recent partnership with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to really research this disaster resilience topic so we can understand how communities can better prepare for and respond to and recover from these disasters, just as we were just sharing what needs to happen. And again, you saw the critical stat from our research at the top of the presentation, but I'll just reiterate it here that we found that every dollar invested in resilience and preparedness saves $13 in impact, damage, and remediation costs after an event. Again, that's everything from job loss, lost income, reduced economic activity, and displacement of the workforce. Not to, of course, even mention the human impact of disasters. To me, that point says it all. That's why it's so important for us to invest in proactive disaster preparedness and resiliency programs like the CDP's Disaster Preparedness Fund, because preparedness is critical to ensuring that communities and people are just better equipped to handle natural disasters, recover from them faster, and effectively, ultimately lessen the economic impact, again, not to mention the human impact. So we just think that's critical for long-term sustainability, recovery, and just building thriving communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate how you've brought together both the human and economic benefits here, where, we know that we want to support our fellow human beings. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we think about families, we think about people. But it's also a smart investment. It's also smart economics. And I think that it's important to recognize that not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. Moving on, Sean, we tend to think of the Home Depot stores for rebuilding, but with the Home Depot Foundation, how do you think about the full spectrum of disaster?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you again, Sarah, for having us. I've already learned so much from hearing Patty and Kate on that first question, so it's great. So the Home Depot Foundation, our disaster program is broken into 3 separate pillars that all align with one another. We have preparedness, response, and long-term recovery, where within each of those pillars, we fund local and national organizations that specialize in those components that can support their communities down to the granular level. So with preparedness, we have national partnerships where we provide funding annually for stocking warehouses strategically placed across the country so those organizations can activate quickly and bring in supplies where needed. We also support local organizations in harder to reach communities like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Alaska, where we'll invest locally to help beef up their capacity as well as provide supplies so they can activate quickly immediately after a disaster. That kind of translates over to our long-term recovery program as well, where we are granting housing organizations within communities that are a year to 10 years after disasters to repair homes or build new homes that in communities that were impacted with hazard mitigation building practices incorporated into them, with all supplies we have from Home Depot that can highlight these efforts. So just what Patty was saying, it's something that we're actively working towards as well. So our preparedness transitions over to our response. When a disaster happens, we can activate multiple levers where we have our national partners can come in quickly, support those communities with meal distribution, debris removal, volunteer management, supply distribution, while local organizations are on the ground getting on their feet. So we have a strong stance where we support both national and local organizations because we want to ensure that we're supporting the broader spectrum of those that are involved in disasters. So then we transition to our long-term recovery program, which just kind of completes the cycle with preparedness. You know, it's a newer program of ours over the past couple of years where, again, we are going back to communities that were impacted where the spotlight is gone, the next disaster happened, but we understand that there is a strong need, a critical need to be met when it comes to housing. So we're going back annually with our grant program to support not only construction of housing, but capacity building for these housing organizations, staffing, tools, equipment, so that that organization is also better prepared in addition to their housing structures.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We keep talking about materials, and so then the critical importance of using those sort of advanced or intelligent, I don't know if we would call them that, but those materials that are better able to withstand disaster. And the huge benefit that they offer to communities and, you know, withstanding existing, but also those looming disasters that we don't predict as well. So it's an interesting area. And thanks for your insight on that, Sean. Kate, oh, sorry, I'm skipping a question. Moving on to Patty. Sorry, Kate. 1 second. Patty, you talked during our planning meeting actually about Three Forks, Montana, and I'm wondering if you can share about the community's challenges and the solutions it's implementing with Headwaters Economics Assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. So Three Forks is a community that participates in Headwaters Economics Floodwise Technical Assistance Program. So this is one of our programs that helps rural and resource limited communities plan and implement disaster risk reduction projects. So this particular town, Three Forks, is rural. They're in Montana. As the name suggests, they're at the confluence of 3 different rivers, the Madison, Jefferson, and Gallatin. So you can imagine the flood risk is extreme in this location. And recently they got updated floodplain maps that show most of their small community in the floodway. This is regulatory. It's a very high hazard zone that's essentially a no build zone. So when the community got this news, it was incredibly devastating, certainly for the residents of the community, but also for their very smart and dedicated staff and city leaders confronting this problem. They just had this feeling of devastation that this was the end of the road for their community, and they just didn't have prospects for economic opportunity. And they didn't have the resources or the staff to begin figuring out what solutions could be on the table for them. What ended up happening, though, is really uplifting. Headwaters Economics was able to work with the state of Montana and other partners to support Three Forks, and they had a successful effort with plenty of trials and tribulations along the way, but to ultimately secure the biggest FEMA flood mitigation assistance grant ever awarded to a Montana community, as well as funds from the state of Montana. And then they're using that funding to implement a green infrastructure project that alleviates flood risk across the entire community. The construction is slated to start this year. This has been, of course, a multi-year effort. And the project is going to cost about $5 million, which is a really big price tag for a mitigation project in a rural community. But then you compare that, as Kate was talking, about this ratio of cost to benefits, you compare it to the avoided costs if a flood were to occur in Three Forks. The costs are estimated at well over $1 million, or rather $100 million. So you've got a $5 million, mitigation project that's going to yield, more than $100 million in cost savings and save people a tremendous amount of hardship. That level of avoided loss really should be duplicated in thousands of communities across the country that have similar risks, but that lack the local government staff, the tax base, and the resources to put together projects on their own. So I think it really is a matter of mobilizing the support that is going to allow this work to progress.
Yeah, $5 million doesn't sound quite as costly when compared with the $100 million of cost savings that it offers.
Mm-hmm.
Kate, visuals we know have a huge capacity to stir us emotionally after disaster, to react and provide assistance. This is the same for corporations and foundations as it is for individuals. How can funders work proactively to encourage their leadership to support funding preparedness and resilience activities rather than just being reactive?
Yeah, even just building on what Patty was saying, just, when you see the devastating impacts of disasters and the increased frequency, you want to do everything you can. I know at Allstate, we even have Allstaters, our employees, beyond our claims team. When there's a disaster, what can we do? What can we send? How can we help? In that time, we try to say money. Money is the best thing because a bunch of supplies coming in is difficult. So we talk a lot about that. In fact, recently I had the privilege of actually visiting the LA wildfire sites and meeting with our customers and nonprofit partners, our claims team, and our agency owners, and you just can't imagine the devastation that you see. I mean, with customers standing on what would have been their doorstep amidst the rubble of their completely destroyed home. But again, building on what Patty said too, there was hope. I mean, that's what was so impressive to see, them showing us around, again, the rubble, but saying they're going to rebuild and they're going to rebuild stronger. And I think that's the key. Again, when you don't have those, you don't see that, it's not as engaging or enticing. You don't have that same urgent call to action when it's on the preparedness side because you don't see the devastation, all that. But I think we just have to hold that close and look at the data again, like what are we spending now versus later? And again, the human aspect and impacts of that. CDP's own research showed that in 2024, I think less than 4% of philanthropic funding was dedicated to resilience and 1% to preparedness. So there's really that gap in funding that we need to encourage others to join us in helping fill. With the frequency and severity of disasters increasing, we can't keep doing the same things we've always done. We have to find new ways to support communities and prepare. So, that's, again, when we teamed up with the U.S. Chamber to research resiliency, it was really important for us to understand how to better prepare for, respond to, and recover from the disasters so we can invest as efficiently and effectively as possible and encourage others to do the same. We really wanted the data because we know the data can really help tell that story. And really the data is clear. Resilience is many times more effective than spending on post-disaster recovery alone. Again, those are still critical dollars, but the more we do in advance, the better off we're going to be in the long term. So we really all need to help get that message out there. And finally, I just want to give a shout out to Sean and the Home Depot team because most often our mobile claims teams are stationed actually in Home Depot parking lots. So customers who are going to get supplies to rebuild and help can more easily file their claims. And we just so appreciate that partnership and ability to do that. But again, just trying to get the word out about how we spend money now to prevent future expenses and bigger expenses later.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, one thing that I've heard from all of you actually is while disaster preparedness and disasters writ large have a sense of overwhelm to them, it sort of seems like this huge task and it can feel overwhelming. There are very clear things that we can actually do and that we can hold on to and that make a huge difference. And so that's a sense of hope, and that through line of hope, I think, really carries in all of the recommendations and strategies you all have highlighted. Sean, you spent 10 years in New Orleans, speaking of recovery, responding to several disasters. What lessons did you learn while there, and what have you brought to your foundation work?
Yeah. So my career in New Orleans was all on the nonprofit side, specifically within housing. So I navigated private and federal dollars on how we apply for those dollars, figured out how we needed to shift our accounting softwares and everything so we could handle that kind of funding. But I have taken all of that to this position at the Home Depot Foundation, and we're fortunate enough to have a lot of individuals on the foundation that have nonprofit background. So we really look at our partners to lead us towards what they need, and then we do the work to try to fit it in our funding box. What I always try to encourage other funders to do is be flexible with your funding. Of course, have your initial agreement and understanding of what the funding is going to be supporting. But throughout the year, we have monthly calls with every one of our partners. If something changes, if there's a hurdle that the organizations are come up against that they weren't ready for, we can kind of take a step back, pivot, rewrite the grant, refocus funding to allow them to move forward so they could be successful in achieving the goals that we put forth together. And then also, truly following their lead. We don't go into communities saying this is what Home Depot wants for New Orleans, for example. Our partners Rebuilding Together New Orleans will go to them and say, what does New Orleans need? How can Home Depot support? And then let's figure out how to put an application together that we can get approved and we can know not only supports the organization, their capacity building, their hammer and nails products of their organization, but the homeowners and the community members. We really lean into a true partnership so we can learn as much as we can about the nonprofit partner and then figure out, in addition to foundation dollars and our product support, what other layers of the company can we pull in and leverage to enhance their operations. So I really approach it with flexibility, understanding, knowing how hard it is for nonprofits to manage multiple different funding sources and what that reporting mechanism looks like for each one of those may be different. So we really try to understand how we can leverage their already existing programs and not rock the boat or cause them to go in a different direction that they're not prepared for.
Yeah, it's so important. I love how you mentioned that you really work and listen to the community to understand what they're articulating the need is so that we can be really thoughtful and responsive in that capacity.
Yeah. One thing I'll add to that is, we have stores in every single community that's impacted by a disaster pretty much. So our associates are there, they live there, they want to be helpful and they want to know what the company is doing. So we'll partner with our stores to have them be our eyes and ears in the community as well, in addition to our nonprofit partners, be like, what are you seeing out there? Like, where are the critical needs, et cetera? And we just layer them all together to get the most efficient funding proposal we can put together.
Yeah, that's a great insight that you have as the foundation to be able to have those touch points in communities and really be able to hear that direct feedback. Patty, we were talking about the LA fires, and they're such a horrific example of disaster that caught the public's attention. What lessons can funders pull from that disaster? What do we learn from that disaster, and what can we do moving forward?
Yeah, good question. So that disaster, like Kate was describing, absolutely feels like it's still in the middle of happening. And there was something like 16,000 homes, and you can imagine the number of people impacted. So I think there's going to be a lot of lessons that a lot of different folks are trying to draw in terms of how we can help prevent that kind of devastation in the future. It's going to take a long time to think through that. But in terms of disaster preparedness, I think one of the key lessons is that we can do a better job making homes more resistant to wildfires. The initial estimate that Headwaters Economics has come up with is that to replace the homes that were destroyed by the LA fires to wildfire resistant standards is going to take about 200 million more than their insurance claims will cover. We know a lot of people are underinsured, or even if you have sufficient insurance, it's not going to get you quite to what you need to build to ignition resistant standards. So importantly, if you, again, we're always thinking about that need for upfront investment, but the long-term savings that it will yield, thinking about the need for a $200 million upfront investment really pales in comparison to the initial estimates of about 150 billion in property damages and capital losses that have been suffered from this, from this disaster. So in my mind, it really clearly demonstrates how costly inaction is. We're talking about the need for a significant amount of upfront investments, which feels really intimidating. But if you look at history, it's pretty evident that society is up to the task. There's times when issues have been elevated to this level of importance. And in those times, we do know how to mobilize resources for cost-effective solutions. It is going to take every tool in the toolbox. So, we absolutely need philanthropic investment. We're going to need to leverage debt financing from municipal bonds to green bonds and every other form. There are some pretty innovative public-private partnerships. If you Google the Fortified Homes program in Alabama, it's a really creative partnership between insurers and the state to replace roofs in hurricane zones. So I think we have a lot of creative thinking already and models to draw on. So, we can be working effectively together to initiate pilots, big and small, that will demonstrate success. And I think that's where a lot of energy is, and it's encouraging.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I want to hear more actually about hazard mitigation work, because I think that is such an intelligent and essential investment as we're thinking about this mitigation and risk reduction moving forward. Sean, I'm wondering if you can talk to us about some of the projects that the Home Depot Foundation has funded in the area of hazard mitigation, and just talk to us about why that is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important for everything that Patty just said and what Kate said, just being as prepared as possible. There's preparedness with stocking a warehouse with supplies to distribute, but then there's preparedness for homes to withstand a disaster. So some examples, and I know Alan Mazzaro wrote in the questions, he talked about Paradise, California. That's one of the examples I was going to use. So over the past 2 years, we funded Habitat for Humanity of Butte County, who is repairing retrofitting existing homes and building new homes to a standard through IBHS to withstand future fires. So we have provided grants to Habitat Butte County to access support for the types of supplies we have in our inventory, from siding to windows to ventilation systems to supporting more defensible space barriers around the house, in addition to their staffing that needs to learn about those practices and implement them across the entire board for their construction. So our goal with them over the last 2 years is to build 20 homes that are that incorporate hazard mitigation, specifically the home hardening build designs through IBHS. We've taken that understanding and we've moved down to Santa Cruz County of California, where we're doing the same thing with the Santa Cruz County Long-Term Recovery Group and Santa Cruz County Community Foundation. And we are going community by community, leveraging the Home Depot inventory, existing building plans that are out there that demonstrate hazard mitigation practices like home hardening and fortified roofs through IBHS, that we can then fund, highlight through storytelling, through media moments, getting people out there to tour those homes to see what it is you can do in person, and then moving on to the next community. So this in December, we moved forward with another grant for Habitat Butte County, Santa Cruz County, California, rebuilding together Bayou, southwest of New Orleans, where they're recovering from Hurricane Ida, where we're going to be focusing on fortified roofing. So our goal, and my goal for every one of these grants, is to then do a tour, invite local organizations, local newspapers, everybody to come in, see how you can incorporate or retrofit existing homes so that they're with building practices so that they can just better withstand in the future, and just spread the word that way. The way I'm trying to spread the word too is to get more funders to the table to see what we're doing and to understand what this kind of investment means for the future, and how you can leverage our dollars for not only preparedness when it comes to being able to respond better with supplies, but just so those communities can withstand the next round of disaster. So this program is new for us over the past 3 years, but it's growing, and eventually we'll have a competitive application process for organizations to apply directly to the organization or to the foundation to receive funding for housing mitigation support.
Yeah, I think you mentioned sort of bringing funders to the table to better understand why this is so critical and essential. And I think you're right, where you sort of, when you see it, you can sort of believe it a bit more, and sort of understand the value that it adds, whether it's roofing or other materials used to sort of mitigate and risk reduce for future disasters. All right, so we're going to keep moving forward with one more question that I have planned for our panel today. But then after that, we're going to move to the Q&A portion of the webinar and start getting to the questions you have submitted. Please remember to put your questions into that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will do our best to address them during the session today. Kate, can you share why the Allstate Foundation has just shown such dedication to supporting disaster preparedness in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many reasons which we've touched on throughout this call. But, at the core, obviously disaster response and preparedness are part of truly the crux of Allstate's business and how we deliver on our promise. We see firsthand the devastation caused. And help our customers rebuild after disasters. So we understand it. Again, when you look at the data, not only in the report and what we found, but Allstate responded and helped customers recover from 132 catastrophic events in 2024 compared to 80 on average a decade ago. So that right there, what can we do to look at this more proactively, not only from a company side, but when we talk about the philanthropic side, Sean talked about kind of the 3 phases of their approach, which is so wonderful and really what we're moving toward. But historically, the foundation honestly had supported disaster response through grant funding in the wake of disasters through an emergency fund that we could understand the level of the catastrophe, have tiered approaches pre-approved, and get approvals and money out the door, approved in 24 hours, out the door within the week to get it as quickly as possible. But that was really reactive, and providing funding to nonprofits and local organizations after a disaster, it's important, but it felt transactional, and that we could do more and look at the problem before it becomes a problem versus just after. Again, emergency funding is still critical, but what we wanted to see what else we could do. So again, we've evolved our focus to include preparedness and resiliency grants, and really aligned with the company's approach as they're looking at this data and research about the importance of preparedness and resiliency funding. So now we do all of it. Before, during, after is how we look at it, and making sure we're really ensuring and supporting the community needs. Similar to Sean, we've really evolved to a trust-based philanthropy model across all of our programs, which really starts with the needs of the community, the nonprofit, the sector. Not here's what we want to do and here's what we want to give money to. I think this is critically important in the time of preparing for or recovering from a disaster, because every community is different and the needs are different. So we always start there and try to, do general operating support as much as possible, again, for that preparedness and reactive side. So really try to be more proactive. And that's why seeding the CDP fund and ensuring that we are investing in upfront is very important to us. as it really lives into our model of philanthropy, our approach, and our mission at the foundation, and honestly, in the company's shared purpose as well. We want to help people and communities thrive, and investing in communities before disaster strikes is an important way to do that. So that's really why we felt this was so critical. We were so grateful to see that CDP was creating this fund, and we felt we had to be part of it.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned a few really key takeaways. One, you mentioned the importance of cash, just a cash donation and the flexibility that it offers. We talk about here at CDP that you can inadvertently create sort of a secondary disaster with stuff. And so really being mindful of how we can actually best support a community, and cash is frequently the most necessary, flexible, immediate need in that capacity as well. To echo also your point, Kate, emergency relief and recovery is essential and necessary, and we want to continue supporting that. We just also want to grow the belief of investing in preparedness, and also all of the other work that can be done to better support community resilience, support a community's ability to withstand disaster and recover equitably when they occur. All right, so we're going to be moving into the next section of addressing audience Q&A at this point. We've received several questions also in advance of this webinar, so I'm going to be working through that list as well as questions that we received in our Q&A box. As a reminder, CDP webinars are aimed at providing education for the philanthropic community. So while all are welcome to pose a question, we'll first try to focus on those addressing donor issues. I also want to acknowledge we've received several questions about the changes from the current presidential administration is making via executive orders and statements from the administration with regard to FEMA and disaster response. We are certainly paying attention to this, but that is also a huge topic unto itself. And so we're not going to use the time during this webinar to delve into discussing what those changes mean or speculate about what future changes could come. And so with that said, let's get into some audience questions. Patty, to turn it over to you first, availability of insurance is an issue. Can insurers be enticed to fund preparedness or to reduce their risk and improve profits?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing insurers at the table in really encouraging ways. We dropped in the link for Fortified Homes. That's an insurance partnership. Obviously, there's the philanthropic side of that equation. At the end of the day, what insurance means to each of us is that we can rebuild our homes, our businesses, get back on our feet after a disaster. So obviously we need insurance markets to function. And when Headwaters Economics thinks of solutions to help keep insurance accessible to people and to keep claims from skyrocketing, what we understand is that we need to be able to reduce claims if we ultimately want that to happen. So that means that we need to be collectively working on risk reduction solutions at scale. And as I talked about before, as a society, we do know how to do this work. We've done a lot for earthquakes, for structural fires. I'm talking about fires that start inside the house. We've made a ton of headway, and it's a matter of now changing perceptions about natural hazards and getting the resources to where they need to go. So I think we're, obviously I am an optimist, but I think we're more than capable of doing this work together. And that's going to have insurers at the table and many others as well.
Yeah, I think I share your optimism, Patty. And I think that we can get there, hopefully. All right, so I'm scrolling through and looking at some of the questions that were getting submitted, and we've gotten several questions about how nonprofits can access funding. And so, as I mentioned, our focus is on what funders can do, but I wonder, Kate or Sean, maybe you could speak to any strategies for community organizations seeking to do and get funding for this work.
Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, good question. We're doing some work on our end actually to help increase nonprofit capacity and resiliency planning. We're doing some pilots on this. One, to just start shifting the mindset about preparedness and resilience in this space. In terms of funding, again, it sounds like both of us are doing a lot more in this preparedness space. So I think it's just encouraging other funders to get out there and do that, showing unique programs. We're always looking at different pilots, ways to try new and different things to help various sectors, whether it's the nonprofit sector, different things like that. So I think we look at it kind of in different ways of what's the latest things happening, how can we best help and allocate our resources. So.
I fully agree with that. I think if communities are having a hard time identifying potential funders or getting a spotlight on their community, one thing that we look at, as well as other funders we're talking to, is collaboration from the organizations within that community. And when I was on the nonprofit side and I heard collaboration, I was like, I don't want to create a whole program just to collaborate with another nonprofit. It's more of demonstrating how your missions together align and support preparedness and long-term recovery for disasters, and not creating a new program that you would have to work with one another. How does a food bank support the housing initiative? How does a housing initiative support other dynamics within that community? I also think, as a funder, I have a network of organizations across the country that I look at. I drill down to local organizations through my own research and my own just experiences. But having a long-term recovery group established, or a VOAD chapter established for your group or your county, is a really good way to get recognized and get on that list of national organizations and locations that have the capacity to request funding and then utilize that funding efficiently. We are really looking at the national VOAD community to be kind of that guide of where are we going to look at communities that have the capacity to utilize the funding that we want to invest for preparedness, response, and then long-term recovery. So I think collaboration is key in the sense of going into it with a holistic mindset of how your organization and your mission supports the larger component for that community.
It's great, and I really appreciate that advice. I know it can be really difficult to navigate the funding environment, and it's really helpful to have sort of concrete steps that folks can take, and also those chapters and groups that they can reach out to and build community with. Along those lines, I kind of want to stay on the sort of funding side for a split second, which is we've had several questions from nonprofits also asking about how could recovery organizations better speak with one voice to funders about the importance of preparation and mitigation funding. What kind of message would you give to disaster NGOs to help them encourage funders to focus on a different stage of the disaster? So again, sort of like helping them sort of group and sort of ask or build this in one voice. What is that message, do you think? And that might be to Sean or Kate again.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think it's expanding on what I was saying about how your request goes just beyond the preparedness, just beyond the response. Like, how does this set up your organization, your community, for long-term sustainability? Some funders only fund response. They will only fund response. So I think if you're approaching that funder to support recovery, how does response translate to recovery in the long run? How can your organization, how can your group be better prepared to respond, even if a disaster has not happened yet? Is there preliminary ways that you can get your organization beefed up with capacity, with support, so that you can respond quickly? I do think the unified voice, really demonstrating again what I just said about how you're leveraging different components of a community, existing resources, existing organizations, to really provide that holistic approach to disasters in general.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think, again, we've said this I've said it a couple times, but there's been lots of data referenced in this webinar that I think data can be so critically important to telling that story. But again, I also think it's the balance of the numbers, the data, the impact, but also the storytelling side of it. You've heard two examples, Paradise and I think it was Three Forks, of like what preparedness can do and how much that can save and how it can help. Like, I think telling that story, and we all just need to want to do a better job of that and get that work out there. And I think to Sean's point, that's how we can collectively work together to, again, shift this mindset about it really does, we call it the preparedness payoff. It really does pay off on so many levels to invest now. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate your point on the significance of data. It sort of gets to that head and the heart. You know, we know that the heart's there. We know that we care about people and care about their well-being, but then also the head aspect of sort of making sure that we also recognize like there's also data showing us that it's beneficial and it's a good investment. Kate, you also flagged a really interesting point earlier in our conversation about the number of incidents that Allstate is responding to now as compared to a decade ago. And just that trajectory alone indicates, you know, the need for this type of investment and this type of work. All right, I'm curious at this point, let me switch to over to another question here. I wonder if maybe actually I can turn it back to Sean. Does Home Depot, we had a question in the Q&A box of, does Home Depot support workforce and talent development for local organizations, in particular long-term recovery committees and partners?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The Home Depot Foundation, one of our pillars outside of disasters is skilled trades development. So over the past 5 years, we've been building out a trades program in partnership with Home Builders Institute on 10 military bases across the country for service members exiting the service to get a certificate for when they go back out into the non-service world, as well as academies that are within communities that anyone can participate and get a training certification. We have taken that and are now exploring the long-term recovery component and how we can better support that. So for example, we have invested in the pilot for Team Rubicon's trades program, where they're specifically building out a program to train individuals that can go into communities after disasters or are within those communities that have been impacted by disasters to get certified to then be hired by local contractors. Our goal is to look at all of that and see how we can explore the long-term recovery components, how we can plug in the trades training in different areas, or let organizations know in those areas what resources are out there and what resources are available. The Home Depot Foundation, are eventually working towards having, again, a competitive program for organizations to apply directly to the foundation for supporting trades programs, whether it be long-term recovery and not long-term recovery. We're piloting out this notion of long-term recovery in LA, in LA specifically. Within our commitment for response and recovery from the LA fires, we are going to be supporting local trades groups in LA to then support and be prepared for the rebuilding components down the line. So we're in a pilot phase with that right now, and we're gleaning information from that to see how we can, if it's something we should be investing in more, or if we should pivot and leverage our existing partnerships with HPI.
That's really interesting, and it's great to hear about all the workforce work that you are doing already.
Yeah.
That's really cool to learn about. All right, Patty, turning it over to you now. We haven't put you in the hot seat. We had several questions though about the importance of identifying vulnerabilities to allow for safer, more resilient, better prepared communities. When you're working in community, how do you address concerns of different groups, such as people with disabilities, the unhoused, older adults, or Indigenous communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it speaks to the mission and philosophy at Headwaters, because the community work that we do to build capacity and help communities reduce disaster risk is really focused on helping communities that don't have the resources necessarily to do the projects on their own. So we're working with a lot of rural communities and a lot of communities that just face staffing and other resource barriers. So it's come up several times in the Q&A, the need for technical assistance, and that really is the model that Headwaters uses, is delivering assistance with a really good track record of helping communities realize outcomes that benefit, diverse members of, diverse residents within the communities. So our focus then is on helping communities with the technical parts of the work, identifying feasible risk reduction solutions, developing their financial strategies. We basically approach this by coming with a lot of resources. You know, our time is funded, we have a lot of experience, we have a high level of technical expertise, but most importantly, as Sean and Kate have mentioned several times, what gets the job done at the end of the day is being extremely responsive to a community's unique needs. So nothing that we do in this technical assistance, you know, bucket of work is prescriptive, where every project looks unique. And that's what it takes to you know, do meaningful work that benefits, you know, the most diverse folks in the community. I do want to say that there's an astounding level of demand for this type of work. Our team alone has a backlog of more than 50 communities that are seeking our assistance with flood and wildfire risk reduction projects. I am sure that Kate and Sean see, you know, this incredible demand in the requests for philanthropic support. And Headwaters Economics has analyzed, you know, federal, state, and foundation programs that fund preparedness and mitigation, and they're just overprescribed to the tune of billions of dollars. Again, as an optimist, what I want to say is that it's really encouraging. This panel and the level of energy where foundations are stepping up to help communities and to invest in mitigation is awesome. We just did a really, you know, small partnership with the Montana Community Foundation. I think I provided a link that maybe we can share that just speaks to their successful efforts directing funding to resource limited communities. So there's a tremendous amount of momentum, and you know, I'm happy to you know, work with everybody involved and just be a part of it.
Thank you. All right. So as we close up this webinar, I'd like to ask our panel one final question. One word, short phrase, why should preparedness matter to funders?
Start with and just say thriving communities, because it's at the heart of everything we do at the Allstate Foundation.
Go ahead, Patty.
I'm going to say that the reason it matters, and this is like pulls at my heartstrings, is because we know it takes resources to do this work. So we need to show up and give the communities the resources that they need to do this critical work.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for funders specifically, it's if you're investing in preparedness, your dollars will be leveraged for long term. It won't just be a flash in the pan investment. It'll be over years and generations, hopefully, that this community will be supported from an initial one or two investments. So it's incredibly important for long-term support. And I just want to say, like, I'm also an optimist, Patty. I love it. And I do want the audience to know, like, funders are talking. We are talking. We are at the same table and we're all saying the same thing. So I already have my notes for Kate and Patty to follow up on how we could work together and leverage our dollars so we can support more communities. So it's happening, it's exciting, and we're all saying the same things. And I really do think we are going in the right direction, and we're going to make some positive change.
Well, thank you all so much. Sean, thank you. Kate, thank you, Patty. This has been an incredible panel today, and really appreciate your time and insights. So as we close up, I just want to give some actionable thoughts from our conversation. One is know your role and take action. Everyone has a role to play in enhancing resilience through preparedness. Philanthropy can play a key role in everything from funding hard infrastructure to supporting families and strengthening their homes, from supporting nonprofits and business and training employees in emergency response to helping cities adopt resilient building standards and implement early warning systems. We can invest in cross-sector collaboration to increase community resilience, partnerships between philanthropy, government, business, community groups, and nonprofits we heard about They're all needed to create effective strategies. Philanthropy can convene and fund these partnerships and, improve your ROI. We heard multiple times today, response and recovery are costly. Philanthropy's proactive investment can reduce costs and ensure communities are better positioned to withstand disasters. This webinar is just one of CDP's many education and knowledge offerings. We provide weekly disaster updates, comprehensive disaster profiles, and issue insights covering US and international disaster topics. We also have special research reports relevant to disaster philanthropy. Our expert advisory services team can partner with donors who seek customized assistance with disaster giving strategies. Beyond our resources, visit our website to learn about our collaborative funds. Our next webinar, for those who like a calendar, is going to be on April 10th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern. In it, we will discuss complex humanitarian emergencies and examine current issues such as what's going on in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you to our co-sponsors today, and thank you again to Patty, Kate, and Sean for sharing their insights with us. Please take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey and let us know what you liked and what you'd like to see in future webinars. It will pop up automatically when you exit the webinar. If you have any questions or thoughts that were not addressed during today's webinar, you please can email them to Tanya at tanya.gulliver-garcia@disasterphilanthropy.org. And thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.